It's the SDG Podcast. Before we get started, you can check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com/podcast or find us on all the social medias, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Solution Design Group. We're back. We're podcasting. Welcome back, gentlemen. Our goal we did a podcast in December called What Has Agile Become? And Nick joined us, Nick Brecken. He couldn't join us today. But our goal was to kind of start with constructive criticism from the developer perspective, from Chad and Peter, and my very limited perspective. And then address the, any criticisms with remedies, solutions, answers. So today we're kind of making this a part two because we did really good on the first part, but we didn't quite get through all the stuff we wanted to talk about at the end. So we got Brian Ganas joining us. He's a BA, Scrum Master, designated hitter. Thank you for being here. And I'm
working on my real estate license as well.
Nice.
You really?
No.
I got mine at over-the-road diesel bartending school at Clown College. I think we have Super Chad Jutner joining us today. And the voice of reason, Peter Lawrence.
That's me.
I'm the host because I like to talk first.
And that's Kyle Bacher hosting us today.
Thank you. Thank you for joining, Kyle. Peter, do you want to kind of recap quickly what we had kind of talked about last time?
Yeah, some of the things that Chad and I brought up, and we never really got to the remedies, but like stand-ups are a daily thing generally. And so it's front of mind for most of us every single day. Whether they're going well or not going well, they're there every single day. We also talked about retros and sort of, if you've been on a team for years, do you really need a retro or not? Brian will help us out with that one. And sprint planning sort of being not necessary. Well, let's put the fun back in sprint planning, right? I think that's a goal there. And then we also talked about some of the language things that were great when they came out, and they really mean a lot of things. But when you sprint for 87 sprints, are you really sprinting? Do people break down their world record marathon runs into 80-some sprints of however long until they get to 26 miles or whatever? So,
and then maybe Peter, we could also talk, if we have time, there might be a part 3 about some of these agile practices apply to new technologies that we're just now exploring, right? So I brought up in our panel discussion a little bit ago internally an idea that this might not be cool for AI, right? Like going like these patterns for and I think I explained it as like these patterns for like science projects. And that's what I think of a lot of when I think of AI projects, I think of them as science projects and not like software projects.
Right.
These practices might not be the best for those. Right, because some of that stuff is experimental, and you don't necessarily have measurable working software at the end of an experiment.
Right.
And then,
so the whole definition breaks down, right? Like
but we got some good feedback from other folks at SDG around like, well, you can still measure something, you can still do this, you can still do that, and it seemed like a good topic for discussion at some point.
All right, so Chad's favorite subject, because he loves them dearly, are stand-ups.
And Brian, I know you have an opinion about stand-ups because you wrote a blog post about stand-ups, which I did read and I really enjoyed it.
Yes.
So let's talk stand-ups.
So I know that one of the main things that I would want to convey is a good Scrum Master hears what you guys are saying and hopefully feels in the same way. Stand-up often gets corporatized, for lack of sort of a better word right now. And it turns into this status update where all we're doing is we get together for what's supposed to be a 15-minute meeting at most, and it turns into a half-hour minimum because we go through every single person's items, every single piece of work that they've had on their board for 2 weeks already. And we are essentially asking for a status update. You are no longer the primary audience of what we're talking about in the stand-up. Upper management or someone at some level above the team becomes the primary audience. And that's driven by apathy, in my opinion. And that's apathy on the part of the Scrum Master as well as the entire team itself.
Well, let me ask this question. Let me just jump in there before.
Please.
Is part of the problem that the team only comes together for those 15 minutes. And so people outside of the team who want to talk to the team try to capture that team in their enclosed space for 15 minutes and
absolutely.
And use them?
There are two main things there that I try to tackle. Is one, I very much work to protect my team's daily stand-up. We've already introduced, multiple other people into these meetings that should not be there. This is supposed to be a safe space. It's supposed to be a place for the dev team itself to work. And actually, I'm going to take dev team out because based on what we were just talking about, I also want to think about Scrum and Agile outside of software development, because the more we can think about it outside of software, the more the concepts really make sense, especially some of the examples we can talk about. The construction industry is one that has actually adopted Agile and Scrum to a degree. So we'll come back to that. But yes, that is a major problem in that now all of a sudden you have upper managers, you have project managers, you have stakeholders involved in this meeting where you are supposed to be able to talk about your concerns and things that you're working on for the day. That's not a safe place to operate as a team. So that is one major thing that needs to happen, is they need to be protected. That's a Scrum Master's job. That's a product owner's job as well. But your Scrum Master really should be the safety net stopping that from happening. The other piece that ties in as well, in my opinion, is that when we are dealing with these teams, as you kind of said, Peter, it's a place where the whole team comes together. That shouldn't be the only time that the team comes together.
Right.
This is supposed to be a check-in where we are meeting with the product owner theoretically, as well as the Scrum Master, and we have that conversation. But this should be a quick check-in. It should be a quick, how are you doing? What are you going to be doing? Can I help? Those are the questions that I tend to ask during a stand-up. And we don't need to force all these conversations that team members need to have throughout the day into this 15 to 30 minute topic. You guys should be meeting outside of it, taking it offline. I can't stand that phrase, but that's what it is. You should take those things offline so that we don't all have to be a part of it when it's not relevant to us.
I think we should make that a parking lot item.
Yeah, can we exclude that discussion from our 15-minute stand-up, and you guys do that some other time? I don't care when.
Yep, and that's theoretically, again, that's the Scrum Master, part of their job is supposed to be moving you along so that you aren't getting bogged down in details that we're trying to solve in 5 minutes. They take longer than 5 minutes, so move it out of the stand-up. A good Scrum Master should hopefully be in pursuit of that goal.
So do you just mute everybody in teams, and that way, as they're having that discussion, you just intermittently mute them so that it sounds like they're having network connection problems?
You can. I just try to be really loud and start shouting over everybody. And I often will do some sort of really elaborate hand waving, especially, with remote, with cameras on. It works. You got to just get people's attention and just try and pull people away, because it's hard. It's hard not to get into those conversations. It is a dedicated time when everybody meets, and it's hard not to drill down into details. But someone has to be cognizant of preventing that from happening every single time it starts to happen.
Once it's gotten, I don't know how to say this nicely, but once it's become a problem, is there a way to get back out of that? Like, I understand, like on the first day, if you kick out the people that aren't supposed to be there and just say, we'll catch up with you later, that works if it worked then. But if it failed and they've been involved for the last, 6 months, how do you fix it?
It's hard, but ultimately, I mean, the technical answer is I set up a new meeting, and I literally just don't allow those extra people to even know how to get access to the meeting.
Shadow stand up?
Yeah, essentially. I mean, it can create, political problems. And someone is going to have to answer to it. But again, that's the Scrum Master. That is what we are supposed to do. We are supposed to protect our team from the things that are distracting them from getting the true work that they need to accomplish done. And that is one of them. So yeah, a shadow stand-up. I have had a team in the past that actually formed a technical stand-up that took place immediately before the daily stand-up.
Okay.
They insisted that it was beneficial. They wanted to have it, but the actual Scrum Master I was working with and I got together with the team, and we tried to say, what you guys are talking about in that meeting is what you should be talking about in our daily Scrum with each other. And let's try and refocus it. But we ran into that problem where there were just too many kind of political things happening in the daily stand-up. So in that particular example, we didn't fix it. We found a solution that worked for the team. They were accepting of it. And according to what they told me, it was productive and it helped them out. So we just let them go with it.
Brian, you used the word apathy. It sounds to me like it's a constant struggle to keep a pattern from turning into an anti-pattern.
It can definitely be a constant struggle. And the apathy I refer to comes in on all parties. It's not only the Scrum Master that needs to remain unapathetic. They need to care every day. I mean, that's their primary job. But the team itself also can't get apathetic about this. Challenge your Scrum Masters and call out behaviors like this that you're seeing, or patterns that you're seeing, and let your Scrum Master know. And, sometimes it's hard, even as a Scrum Master, you get used to it. And sometimes you fail to see some of those things. So if you're noting them, bring it to your Scrum Master. And again, a good Scrum Master is hopefully going to tackle those issues for you. That's our job.
I mean, it's like driving on the interstate and then coming and driving in town, right? You tend to drive a little bit faster because you've been driving so fast for so long that like, oh, wait, I need to slow down.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
Chad, you've been very quiet.
I've been enjoying Brian's voice. It is lovely. So how do you pull out of that, Brian? I mean, especially on projects. So here's the thing, like I get a lot of value as a lead on projects, hearing everybody kind of get a little bit down into the details in stand-up, right? I feel like that's when it works for me. But you're right. Like when your stand-up is 10 technical resources plus 12 non-technical resources, all trying to help, managing all the help offered is a heck of a job, right? So like somebody hears, we have a nice little technical conversation about gateway timeouts or something, right? Like just some random topic, and we throw out solutions. And then somebody hears it that's not technical and was like, well, hey, I'll set up a meeting with these 3 people. Now I'm in a meeting. Thank you. That helped. You're right. Getting those people out of that meeting, out of that stand-up, once they're in there, it's like gum on your shoe. It's not going away.
Yes.
So I can empathize with with the technical resources that you were talking about that had their own technical safe space to talk about real things. And then we go into the actual stand-up and we're like, yeah, no, I'm not blocked. I mean, you might be blocked, but you don't want to say you're blocked because holy smoke, somebody's going to try to help. And that's honestly one of the worst things in the world sometimes. I don't know how to fix that.
Yeah. In your example, Chad, when you're talking about, you have the 10 technical resources and the 10 non-technical, are the non-technical people considered a part of the team or no?
It's ambiguous, right? Because it'll be like, you might have stakeholders in a stand-up. You might have, various levels of management in your stand-up. You might have people that are, hey, I'm just in there to listen. Not going to really,
Yep.
Okay, great. And then you have your Scrum Master, right? So there's all levels of people that tend to try to attach them to this daily meeting.
It's easier than getting a report for them, right?
Yes.
They get their progress report. No, I thought you were going to come in with an awesome answer.
You're touching on exactly one of the things. So one of the pieces that Chad touched on, that ambiguity, who's on the team and who isn't, that needs to be removed. Determine completely understood who is the team. That's who the meeting is for. And that is one of the primary pieces of information you have to know so you can protect who that team is. Now, there can be non-technical resources on a team, in which case you are now including them within that process, which kind of touches on a second thing, is that people who are there just to listen, that's not what this is for. That's how it turns into a status up. No one should be there just to listen. And that can include the Scrum Master, that can include the product owner, that can include other people on the team itself. If you are just there to listen, what value are you really bringing to the meeting? And if the answer is really nothing other than just to consume the information, it's not to say that you absolutely can't be there, but be aware that you are a possible anchor that's going to slow down every single one of those daily meetings. Your job, if it's truly just to listen, then just listen. If you have something that you want to discuss afterward, bring it up afterward. Ping that person who who was bringing up something you would like to know some more information about. And the other piece that Chad touched on that I've never thought about this before, that sometimes, I want to help, and that can just cause even more problems. Honestly, I don't know exactly what I would want to do about something like that, but that is an issue for sure. There's no need for you to explain the same concept 4 different times to 4 different people. And so that's something, I know this kind of jumps us ahead in the topics a little bit, but that's what retros are. That's where we should be talking about an issue like that, Chad, keep having to give the same answer to 3 different people throughout the week because for whatever reason. So one of the potential solutions that I just immediately come up with was, okay, so clearly I'm identifying Chad owes a status update to a few people throughout the week. How can we help him deliver that without having a bunch of meetings? And if that means that we need to ping somebody, Scrum Master perhaps, who takes a couple bullet point notes from Chad during those stand-ups so that it can be delivered out and he can then go back to his work items, maybe that's the solution.
So you're, because I know Chad is really good at process guarding his time. Like he's got self-described OCD. And he doesn't like time wasting. And you're talking about you're going to guard his time. You're going to help him.
If he wants the help. That's the other piece of it too. Like I don't just start doing it. Like that's a conversation Chad and I need to have. And, it's kind of going in a little bit of a cycle of, hey, Chad, how can I help? I'm going to help. But hopefully as Chad can then have a conversation with a trusted Scrum Master who has demonstrated a history of actually doing something to help. And I think that's one of the other big pieces is that's why retros often feel useless is if nothing really changes as a result of retros, why keep having them? And same thing in regard to why have a conversation with your Scrum Master if you don't feel like anything changes. So it's our job, again, as Scrum Masters, when Chad brings that to me, I need to do something to make him to help that problem. Otherwise, he's not going to keep coming.
Well, and honestly, the where you talk about the retro, where you have the same thing coming up over and over and over, that needs to go number one. And in the retro, you need to come up with steps to resolve it, right? Like everybody's been talking about this. We've said it over and over and over. It's still coming up. If we do one thing in the next 2 weeks, how do we get rid of this one problem or not? Or do we just give up and throw it away? Because bringing it up over and over is not going to make it any better. So you either have to fix it or accept it, right? You can't do.
And I think, Peter, you really kind of touched on sort of one of the main things that I try to bring to the retro sphere of everything is I can't solve huge problems every 2 weeks. Like it's not going to work. But what we can do is, it's kind of the old mantra you keep hearing about user stories and whatnot. If it's too big to get done in one sprint, you need to break it up into smaller things. Right. That applies to all types of work, including how do I improve the process for my team? I can't solve the huge level of politics that we have to cut through.
Remove politics from team, right? Oh, that's an easy bullet point.
Yeah. Give me 2 sprints, I'll have it taken care of.
Yeah. How many story points is that?
Right. That sounds like at least an XL t-shirt to me. So
yeah.
But it's definitely about grabbing a consumable small work item that somebody can take care of. And yeah, it might take us a long time to get the overall goal solved, but we can get little pieces here and there. And just with anything, as with anything else in life, if you start to see even small incremental pieces of help happening over and over, you're going to feel more positive and more excited about the process. And then hopefully retros can actually become productive again. So once again, I think that's a job of a Scrum Master is to pull the reins back and remind the team, we can't solve the world in an hour meeting every other week. We have to break it up into these smaller chunks of work.
Hey, so, Brian, can you
go ahead, Chad.
Put a positive spin on ideal stand-ups, right? Walk us through like how you would do it. Like what does a perfect stand-up meeting for you look like?
So everything is pretty much virtual these days. So I'm kind of going off of that, but cameras on. Because I really think it's important. I have fought for that at all of my clients, all of my previous work engagements. I don't think cameras need to be on for every single meeting we ever have, but stand-ups I think are one of the important ones. It is a team building exercise as much as it is a, addressing work type exercise. So cameras on. I would take us through a brief conversation, and I often use the phrase, you'll hear this from me, in 1 or 2 sentences, tell me what you're going to be doing today. And then, do you need any help? Those are the 2 primary questions I ask. What are you doing today? Do you need any help from me or the rest of the team? I know that one of the other big questions we're supposed to ask is, what did you work on yesterday? I rarely find that question to be of value, so I typically don't ask it myself. If there are situations where it's warranted, you do it. But anyway, those 2 questions. And your answers should be quick They should be relatively high level, and a big emphasis on the second question, do you need any help, as opposed to what are you working on today? What are you working on sounds like a status update. It's not. It's really more just meant to be a conversation starter about, can anyone jump in and help you with what you're going to be doing? Does anyone want to jump in because maybe they have an interest in that area? That's what you're trying to identify there. But the bigger thing is, can I, as your Scrum Master, help? Can someone else on the team help you? The answers, again, should be very short. Regardless of team size, 15 minutes is always my goal. I try to shoot for no more than that. And if it wraps up in 5 or 10 minutes, then it's done. And you end it. There's no point in keeping it going just for the sake of keeping it going. So that's a high-level answer. Is there more detail you'd want to get into?
Well, I mean, do you have an opinion on like kind of meticulously doing a roll call down a Jira board? Is there an opinion there? Is that effective for you?
I should have known that's what you were going after. Yes. So I am personally not a fan of screen sharing during a meeting and at all, really, unless it's absolutely relevant to a quick piece of information we're going to be talking about. But there's often this concept of the Scrum Master, I've heard it known as walking the board, where you put up the Jira board or the Azure board, the Kanban board up on the screen on a screen share, and we go through one by one. Chad, what are you working on today? Peter, what are you doing today? Kyle, how about you? And we go through each one of your work items that we've seen on this board for weeks already, and we already know what it is that you have going on. I do not do. I don't think it's a good use of time. If there's a reason to get into a very specific work item, sure, let's pull it up on screen. But no, otherwise it should be a conversation like we are having right now. 4 people on a camera just telling me what you're working on today.
And so ideally describe what you're working on without calling out the Jira number or any piece of information that's numerical that somebody has to look at, right?
I think calling it out is okay, but why have it up on the screen unless there's a reason for us to look at it on the screen? I was going to say, otherwise it feels like we're just using it as a reminder of what you're working on today. And my hope is you guys would all come to a morning stand-up knowing what you need to do that day without me showing you on a Kanban board what it is.
I come in cold. I've forgotten everything I was working on yesterday and need a reminder.
These used to be like in person. Nobody ever shared a screen, right? Like when we would sit around a table and actually talk about like have an actual standing up stand up, right? In the break room, the cafeteria or whatever.
Really?
Yeah.
Brian, can you almost make it a game to see like how efficient we can make this thing, how efficient we can get through this? Let's go.
I have done that. I have actually attempted a timed response. I found that caused more stress than happiness, but yeah, and it was meant to be friendly, but it was literally meant to be, what are you working on today? And do you need any help? You've got 40 seconds. And it's not meant to be like a, you don't get slapped if you go over it. But the idea is,
you just need the Toastmasters card of green, yellow, red, right?
Like you got the talking stick, and and then that turns into a club.
Yeah, it can definitely. And to Chad's point, it goes to the same thing of like the whole reason we call it a stand-up. And I know this is pretty well known, but you literally stood. You were not supposed to sit down. You weren't supposed to get comfortable because the idea is it's supposed to be a quick hallway meeting. You shouldn't even really be in a conference room. You should just, it's a water cooler conversation about essentially just answering that question. Do you need any help today? That's really what you're trying to get at. So yeah, it's the pandemic did not help that issue because when we went virtual, people were scrambling to figure out how we work virtual. A lot of teams, and the easiest way was, well, I can screen share and I can just show you because here's our beautifully, curated list of all the work items we have to do. And that set us back because we're never going to capture the in-person spirit again. The working professional world has changed. It's going to be virtual. Even if 9 out of 10 people are in office, there's still one other person who needs to be remote. So we're going virtual. It's okay, but try and capture the spirit of what it's like to be in person, which again is why I emphasize cameras on as well.
That's a funny point that you bring up because in the past I've been on teams where all but 1 or 2 were in person and the other one was virtual. And as soon as the team found out that the virtual people weren't standing, they decided they could sit down for their stand-up too.
Take away their chairs.
Well, or have it in a hallway, right? Or have it in a space that's just there for talking, right?
Yep.
Everybody take the meeting on your phone, because you can run Teams on your phone, and you'll do the West Wing walk and talk together. And we're going to walk this far, and then we're going to be done. So we got to
Everybody get on their treadmills.
Yep.
I think that is something too. This has been a topic that's been coming up for me a lot recently of, do we remember before we all used to have individual laptops with cameras, we all used to get in a conference room and just call people too. And we were on a conference line.
Yeah.
And yeah, there were things about it that didn't work. There were things that did work compared to how we're doing it now. And so there is, even though I just emphasized, cameras on, there are aspects like that, like you're saying, Kyle, of if you're a person who likes to pace around and walk, and that's how you converse your best, then do it. And if that means you can't have your camera on, fine, that's okay. Because as long as we're getting the best you that we can get in that meeting, it doesn't really matter what formats it's happening in.
Teams runs on a phone. Everybody has a phone. Every phone has a camera.
That's true.
There are no excuses.
Yeah, that's fair.
I'm not having Teams on my phone.
I'm sorry, Chad. That's a problem that you need to solve.
Well, no, you can do it at his desk. We get the best chat at the desk. That's okay.
I would like to add, being the tech guy, I think it's critical to have a decent camera, a decent mic. To me, that was a big problem with the old school conference call. We're going to conference you in.
That's fair.
Is the person on the conference call is like the person in the back seat on a road trip.
Right.
And you're really missing a lot. It's hard to get a word in edgewise. You can't see people, read body language. It was just horrible. So I think removing some of those little sticking points and frustrations for people, like if you can't hear somebody, it is really frustrating.
Yes, it is. And I definitely agree. You got to have a pretty big personality to be a person who can do sort of an old school teleconference manner and still be yourself in a meeting like that. So people who are a little more passive, a little more quiet, probably not the best solution for them. But, the personalities I see here in front of me, I think the four of us could probably handle something like that without really changing who we are.
I have literally yelled when I've been on the phone. I've yelled, "Hey, stop.
Yeah.
Everyone listen to me now."
I also think all teleconference lines need to come. I know it would get abused, but they all need to come equipped with a button that you can press that just sounds off like an alarm. So you can just make everybody be quiet for 1 second because the guy on the phone needs to say something right now.
Yeah.
They all need it.
Chad, I'm glad you have a new laptop with a really nice camera.
I do like this laptop. Brian, okay, so I know what the ideal stand-up is, right? Can we move on to some of the other ceremonies? Because I love your idea of how that should look. I love the idea of not making it so regimented, and I love the idea of not screen sharing because we know, right? Especially with some of the complexities in some of our projects, right? I just want to hear vague details and have everybody understand, yes, this connectivity needs to happen here. These things, all of that stuff is the context that we're trying to get out to move a project forward.
That work's going to block me, so I need to pay attention to it.
Exactly.
I'm going to block this work, so they need to pay attention to me. All those things, right?
All right. Now let's talk about sprint planning session. What does that look like for you?
Yeah, sprint planning is tough. That's one of the. So first of all, my certification would murder me if I didn't correct. We're supposed to call them events now, not ceremonies. So that's one thing. So some language updating for you guys.
I have a lot of opinions on language.
We'll get there.
We'll get that. Episode 3, we'll cover that. The sprint planning is a really tough one. It's because it's very often dependent on your product owner and how prepared they are coming into that meeting. And I don't think that's the way it's really supposed to be. The information that you're looking at in a sprint planning session really should already be fleshed out and kind of ready. And ideally, all you're really doing is just grabbing it and putting it into a sprint. I mean, that's the primary activity there that you're supposed to be doing. I think we all know it's not realistic. And so you often get into details, you're hammering out details on these individual stories, work items, whatever they may be. It's a very difficult one. I don't have a great answer for you because it's so individualized to the team. But I think what's important to me when I try to run a sprint planning is the time boxing of it. We could be in there for hours and you've got to stop it at some. And so that I would say that's one of my primary goals is I think typically you're supposed to limit those to an hour. I'd have to go look it up honestly, but there is a recommendation through Scrum as to what you're supposed to do, and I can't recall off the top of my head. But anyway, keep that time check going. Make sure you're being productive. And then I think the other big thing to me is you're going to start talking about things that come way later, and stop those as soon as you can, because it's just, we're talking about the next sprint, maybe the sprint after that, and stop after that. So those to me are the two main things I really try to do, is just to halt the conversation when it gets too far down the road.
Can I ask you a couple of quick clarifying questions here? So one, how many pre-sprint planning meetings do you typically have?
Too many, I think is the answer. Yeah.
What is the right amount?
Yeah, Again, it's so dependent on how your team is structured. In an ideal world, 0. I mean, the product owner is essentially responsible for having those work items as ready to go as possible for the whole team to come together. Now, there's going to be points of clarification that need to be made. When we start doing story pointing, things like that, that's a whole separate conversation we can have. But those obviously require team input to a degree. But ideally, all of that would be done before we go into sprint planning. So ideally, yes, the answer is 0. I think realistically, that's not going to be the case. But in any of the pre-meetings, limit it to who truly needs to be there. If I know that there are 3 tickets that I want to get done in the upcoming sprint, and I know that Chad's my guy who's going to have the information on those 3 tickets, I don't need to get the whole team together. I'm going to ping you, Chad. I'm going to ask you, hey, I need to get some clarification on these. Who else should I bring into the conversation, or can it just be the 2 of us? We'll figure it out from there, and then they'll be ready and fleshed out, ready for the backlog.
I mean, is that backlog grooming? Is that?
Yes.
I mean, that's where you pick out the right people to give you the information you want. Mm-hmm. Maybe they assign points, maybe they don't, but they get the story capable of being estimated at least, right?
Exactly. Yep. Try to do as much pre-work as possible is essentially the thing.
So I do like to have one technical pre-sprint meeting, small one, right? So that we can get an idea, okay, this is what we know the product owner is going to, he wants this done, right? This is like some of the big ideas that we want to accomplish this sprint. Let's work through some of the dependencies on this and make sure that we've got all the dependencies taken care of before we can, before we go into sprint planning with this one idea thinking we're going to get this done with no pre-work done around like legit hardcore technical dependencies on whatever that is. And that's
right.
Where some of this, I think, I've had projects where that doesn't happen. And so sprint planning becomes a chaotic mess. Sure. Because you might have a product owner that is firm, like, I want this done this sprint, this is the one thing, and like, dude, you got to, like, we don't even have an Apple Store account yet, we can't get our app into the store, we got to do all of this pre-work, like, these are the type of dependencies that the foundations that we need to have in place, so we'll work on those this sprint, and then your thing can come next sprint. And it sometimes feels like a little bit to say, like, we literally can't do your thing,
Yep.
And so I very much like the idea of just one technical pre-sprint meeting to say, hey, do we have all of the underpinnings in place to satisfy what we think this is going to be?
Yeah.
And if it's a 5-minute thing, like if it's a project that's been out there for 4 years, right? Well, you probably don't necessarily need that. But if you're bootstrapping something and doing greenfield development, there is going to be a lot of that.
Absolutely.
But if you're adding a feature to a 20-year-old application, you might really, really need to have that meeting.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, there's a point in the project's lifespan where, like, yeah, early on, you probably need a lot of that. And, like 3 years in, maybe not so much. But then as its tendrils get spread throughout an organization, you'll probably have to start bringing that stuff back.
You got to trace down that rope.
Yeah.
I think so. One thing is I love that idea. I love that idea that, as the technical group, you decided you needed to have this pre-meeting. And as a Scrum Master, the question that I would ask of you is, essentially, during the retros, my question would be, are you guys still having that meeting? Is it useful? Is there anything I can do to make it more useful for you? Those are the questions. And if it's still helpful, do it. If you need to have more meetings, do that. If you want to find a way, I can ramble about this, but I think that's an excellent idea. And the check-in that you just want to have during the retros is it still a great idea? And if it stops being one, then talk about stopping. And, when we kind of talked about, when you start a project, you need all these meetings. As you get more mature, you need less meetings. But eventually, 20 years later, you might need meetings again. That's what you bring up during a stand-up, is you identify, hey, I'm kind of noticing that we're running out of some of these details when we're doing sprint planning. Do we need to kick up that tech meeting, that pre-planning tech meeting that we used to have again? That's what you talk about in a stand-up.
Wait, you can get rid of meetings? How does that?
So
I thought you just kept adding different ones until your calendar was full.
You keep adding meetings, and you keep adding people to the meetings that you've added.
Right.
And
Chad, did that satisfy your interest in the Scrum planning?
I am satisfied, Kyle.
Excellent.
There was one other thing I wanted to touch on there, and that is that we place a lot of responsibility on the product owner. And one of the things that you identified, Chad, is why if I can take off my Scrum Master hat and put on my BA hat, this is where I think BAs play a really critical role, because I think a BA can often step in and be a little bit of a buffer between the product owner and the dev team. The BA is the person who could get together with a product owner while they are doing sort of the pre-work that they should be doing for sprint planning. And the BA can hopefully be the one who now understands things enough, not to the level you guys are going to understand, but they understand enough that they can pump the brakes on the product owner a little bit and say, you are asking for too much too fast. We've got to break this down, or at a minimum, ask the team what we're ready to take on before we start dumping all of these work items into the sprint. So that is one thing I'd really like to advocate for teams to include a BA type resource. I do think it's critical, and I kind of tend to think of BAs as sort of junior POs, like that they're product owners without the authority that we give to product owners.
Sure.
But I think that's where the role is evolving in my mind. There's probably people who'd fight me on that, but I do think it's a critical piece of the team, because if you only have technical and you only have a business representing product owner, which is typically what we see for POs, there's a big gap there, and someone needs to help fill it. And I think too often we're asking the PO to fill it in, and they don't have the time. I think we see that 99 times out of 100. They just don't have the time to take care of that.
They're not going to do the BA work that the technical people need. They're going to track down things that they need to know.
Exactly.
And then they're going to stop.
Yep.
Peter, what's next on the set list? Are we at retros or?
We could. Yeah, what does the ideal retro look like?
The ideal retro is an elusive unicorn that I have yet to.
I want to know what Chad's ideal retro looks
I would also love to.
There you go.
Yes.
Chad, what's your ideal retro look like?
I think I actually talked a little bit about it early on. It's one that starts with, I'm starting at sprint 2, 3, or 4 now, not like 1. But hey, here's all the action items that we called out last retro. Here's where we're at with these, right? Where we can, instead of dev teams always being held accountable for, hey, you put 3 story points on this and you've worked on it for 3 sprints now. It's an opportunity for us to say, hey, we've raised these 3 things in retros. Where are you at with those, Brian? Like, what's going on with those? And it's so retro starts with this shared responsibility around action items. Like, hey, if this is a technical action item, if it's a business, if it's a process, it's whatever.
How many action items? How many action items do you cover in a sprint, in your ideal sprint, ideal retro?
Yeah, I don't have a number. I mean, as many as you need, right? Like if you walk into something and there's no, like if I walk into an organization and they have no AWS account, right? Like, well, that's a big deal and we got to address that. And that's a technical action. It's something that we have to handle. And the process around that, everything else, I don't know. But it starts with accountability for action items. And then what else is going on, right? Like what new inputs do we have into the process that we're a part of? And what parts of that aren't working for you. So that's kind of the what's going well, what's not going well thing. But like, I think the phrasing could be a little different. Like, do you have any input into the process is a wonderful way to ask people to participate instead of like just saying, hey, this is going really good. And then
I love that. That's a really great question. Like I'm literally writing it down in secret because I'm going to start asking that.
And then there should be a part where you just call out like, hey, here's who did, kudos, like give kudos.
right?
Like
Kudos is a
something
great
where
thing to have.
people can actually be recognized in front of the team. That would be
Yes.
super helpful. And that's it.
So review of action items, go through and look for process improvements and other action items that need to come above, and give kudos to the team as appropriate for whatever you guys are working on. That's
a good
the
start.
idea.
Yeah.
And so then do you pick through your list of things to build your action item list, or do you just do everything? Check them off as you go.
Boy, this is starting to sound more tedious than it needs to be.
This
right?
is retro. You're describing retro sprint planning right now.
Yeah, pretty much.
Honestly,
yeah.
but that's okay because it doesn't have to be that tedious. But I think to a degree, if you're having good productive retros, you're going to have a running list of items that have to be addressed. And as we kind of discussed earlier, you won't be able to deal with all of them in the 1, 2, or 3 week sprints that we typically are running within. So the team hopefully can have some patience and understand that this is going to be a running, I hate to say it, but a backlog of items that these just aren't technical work items. These are now items for the Scrum Master or the PO to address on behalf of the team.
So Brian, you've come through the ideal retro. Let me ask you this. How different is your ideal retro from Chad's ideal retro?
It's very, very similar. There's a few things that I add as kind of criteria. So one, for as much as I talk about how much I want to protect my team during the stand-up, the retro is the single most important place to protect team safe space. Every single product owner that I have worked with, I've had a conversation with them in that at any moment I may need to uninvite them from the retro because the team needs a safe space. There are no stakeholders. There are only the people on the team get to be in the retro. That can also include the Scrum Master at times, as in I don't think as a Scrum Master, I always create value in the retro. My goal is to always create value, but there are times when there needs to be a conversation that I'm not doing my job, perhaps. And the team needs to be able to have that safe space. Now, I, pat myself on the back. I've never run into that. I've never been asked to not be in one of my own retros, but I think it's something that a Scrum Master should be prepared for, is that the team does absolutely need that safe space. So that's one of the main things to me. And then again, just respecting that time frame. There are times where the retro could go for hours and you want to stop it because it just turns into ranting and, being upset. And there's a healthy time and place for that. And that can include the retro. Sometimes you do want to go over the hour or whatever you set up for it, but don't let it go to 2 hours, because otherwise we're just entrenching ourselves in negative feelings, and that's not going to help. Let everybody sleep on it, and then schedule a mid-sprint retro if you need to. I mean, that seems, I'm adding a lot of unnecessary terminology, but schedule a little emotional check-in, basically, to find out how people are feeling.
Eventro.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, let's add some more jargon. There's not enough.
You should copyright it now.
You heard it here first.
Okay, so it's okay to have a lot of things to work on as long as you're not intentionally working on them all at the same time. Some of them are just going to have to wait for a little bit.
And be transparent about it. I mean, it doesn't need to be a hidden conversation. It's literally just you guys brought up 10 things we want to try and address. I can't do all 10 in the next 2 weeks. What's the top one? What's the most approachable one? Especially when you're first kicking off as a team, you can't grab those high level audience. You got to do some low hanging fruit first,
right?
To show, hey, one, I'm invested in this and I want to help you guys, and also just to show the team we're making those iterative, small and incremental changes, and hopefully we will build that up to a faster pace or velocity.
Do you check in on items throughout in a stand up? Perhaps to see how things are going.
You're like in the middle of a sprint or during the retro itself?
No, but like between retros, I've got action items. I don't want to get to the next retro and say, well, we totally missed all 3 of our action items, all 5 of our action items, because we didn't check in, we didn't try.
When it's a really key thing that I know the team really, really cares about, that becomes my update during the daily stand-up, because that's what I'm working on.
Ooh, look at that. Yep. There you go. I like that.
Yeah, it goes back to that theme of if you're only there just to listen, what value a Scrum Master should have work items that they're doing. It's just very different than what the engineering team is typically.
Do you ever? I mean, obviously, some action items lend themselves to tickets, right, or work items that and some don't. Trying to get Chad to smile more. Maybe that's not necessarily a work item, but
how high
we
do
can check
t-shirt
it.
sizes go?
Peter, I don't think we're supposed to be able to tell people to smile.
No. I'm not telling you to just, I'm trying to think of action items that I can do to make you smile more.
Oh,
So to
okay.
help you help.
Hey, I've got
Make
a
it more
couple
fun,
of questions for Brian that are kind of not tied to any specific topic, but when we're talking about a sprint, which I think it's well known that I hate that word for
Chad's favorite word.
Gosh,
Marathon sprint.
How strongly do you feel about the length of a sprint and making it a fixed length throughout the life of a project? Do you have opinions?
That's a great question. And honestly, it wasn't until I kind of started hearing your thoughts on this that I didn't think about it much before that. A sprint is what it needs to be. And if you set 2-week sprints in the beginning, if that makes sense for the life of the project or product, keep it. If it doesn't make sense anymore, change it. You do whatever you have to do. I was at a client where we actually, this is real, we theorized the concept of 1-day sprints. And it was mostly just to get our product owner to engage with the Scrum process the way that we kind of were trying to get him to. And the idea was just you take all the little things you're kind of supposed to do and you just shrink them down. Like sprint planning becomes a 2-minute exercise in a situation like that. But the whole point being a sprint should be as long as it needs to be. Another concept that I was just very recently introduced to that I think I'm going to start enacting too is this idea that typically you see a sprint runs, for simplicity, let's just say it runs a Monday. A 2-week sprint runs from a Monday to a Friday, 2 weeks down the line. And then you just start up again on that Monday. So a team I recently talked to extracts 1 day from the end of that sprint. So they run Monday to Friday and then another Monday to Thursday. And then that Friday is kind of a chill out day. It's a let's come together. That's when they have their retro. They might also do their sprint review and demo that day. But it's more meant to just give the team a chance to relax, remember what we're ultimately here for, and that you are not really supposed to necessarily be drilling into the technical work that you guys are doing on that particular day. That's a day where you'd introduce like team building things and the little fun things that everybody wants to do. So that's something as well. Like your sprint can last 2 weeks. That doesn't mean it's 10 working whiplash working days. You configure it to what makes the most sense for the team and the project or product.
I've worked with the idea of variable length sprints in the past, right? Where, I think the idea at the end of a sprint is that you're going to deliver value, you're going to deliver a feature, you're going to deliver something or a release, right? And I've worked with Scrum Masters that would get really pedantic and silly about rolling a story from one sprint to the next, right?
Sure.
And it got to the point where we were spending more time trying to figure out how to cut a story down to the point where we can deliver something in a sprint. Like there was more time sprint meta, discussions around
Meta chopping instead of
exactly, right? Instead of just saying, well, what if we just had a 3-week sprint?
I have done that, and it's glorious.
Or a 4-week sprint, or early on in a project when you are really just, once you get to sprint zero, once you're set up to sprint zero, to be at sprint zero, those first few sprints are going to be a lot of still technical discovery probably. They're going to be, especially on greenfield projects, they're going to need to be longer. You're not going to be able to deliver much in 2 weeks.
Right.
Working with your product owner to understand what is really what's the intent of this sprint? What's the theme of this sprint? What do you want to deliver? Okay, if you want that, totally doable, man. But this is going to be a 3-week sprint or a 4-week sprint, or maybe it's a 1-week sprint, right? Like we can deliver that in a week. And then change cadence around releases, right? Like, hey, this is now that we are version 1.0 of this product. Let's talk about what the release cadence is that you want to achieve. And then let's model our sprints after that instead of this rigid, 10-day system that just keeps going until the end of time.
There's so many things I want to address on there. I'm trying to write them all down, but I'm going to start with this one. So changing how your sprints run mid-project is challenging. And the reason for that is that there is reporting that has to happen outside of the team. And we talk about burn up or burn down charts. I mean, that's typically what you hear. And so there is a level of predictability that Scrum Masters and project managers and product owners do need to try and maintain. And so the idea being that changing from a 2 to a 3 week sprint for, a couple sprints, that is something I would push back on, only because I want to keep having that predictable model of what the timing itself is looking like. But I think that then touches on the other thing that you're getting at, is that we don't need to be so focused on what has to happen the exact same at the end of every sprint. There's no answer there. And that includes releases too. Like, we've often fallen into this pattern of we do our release at the end of a sprint. There's no rule that says you have to do that. Sprints and releases are separate topics. Now, it makes sense in a lot of ways to tie them together. They don't have to be. Work items that we're putting into our sprint. So when you're talking about something that's going to extend well beyond multiple sprints, to me, the idea is don't lengthen a sprint to accommodate all the work. It is ultimately break it into the workable pieces, but don't make that become the new problem. Like you said, that shouldn't just be the new problem we're dealing with. So in that case, what I would simply ask of you is, okay, Chad, we've got this one work item. It's a waste of time for us to go through and break this into, sprint-worthy multiple items that we can add into the next 2 or 3 sprints. So instead, what I'm going to ask you is, let's just carry this story from sprint to sprint. But every time I'm going to ask you, could you also throw a card onto our board for documentation purposes that basically tells me how many story points of work did you do for that particular item? And that's purely for tracking and documentation purposes when this information has to get reported out to a higher level, which is, again, a whole separate topic that we can talk about how appropriate that is and whatnot. But the real world, we're going to have to. And that's why we keep sprints.
So rather than rolling and rolling and rolling and really that really throws off the burn up, burn down chart, right? Is if you roll stories over, that throws everything off, right? Because now your points didn't get done and all of that. Your graph isn't pretty, which apparently is an issue.
Yes.
Must have a pretty graph.
Right.
But
the one reason I like extend the flexibility of it is because if you say, okay, no, maybe it's just we're going to stick with the 2 weeks. Well, you're also interrupting that productivity with the ceremonies that happen at the end of a sprint, right?
Events, yeah.
And I'm sorry, the events. I'm
trying to learn.
Yeah,
I wrote it down.
Which is a momentum killer sometimes, I think, for dev teams, right? Like, I mean, the events themselves lend themselves to killing a lot of momentum, right? Because it's realistically, I mean, it's a half day that we take out of our team's life to plan talk about our retro, talk about our planning session, and talk about whatever else alongside all of the other things that we do. So that would be one of the only things that I would push back on and say, like, yeah, I mean, that's true. I get what you're saying. We do have to report up, and that's never going to go away, and that's important. But you are going to take the wind out of our sails a little bit,
sure,
by interrupting what could be, especially at the end of 2 weeks, we'll probably at that time pedal to the metal, like finally like getting close to delivering something, and then stop. We're going to sit in this meeting now. Yeah. And then we're going to have a retro. And on the retro, we're probably going to talk about how this could have been a 3 week sprint. And then we're not going to address. It's going to be an action
over and over.
Brian, how do you set the stage for these things? How do you onboard people into this kind of way of working? Because it's, you're working within a framework, but you have to have flexibility. It's something that, not everybody's starting at the same spot, new scrum masters, different projects, everything's the same. So there's, you have your strategy, but a lot of it's tactical. And there's a lot of things that have to happen that people really don't enjoy doing. The reporting up, the documenting, coming up with story points, all that kind of stuff. How do you onboard people into that? How do you give people the why so that they understand that it's, okay, this is happening. Let's just all roll with it and get it over with. How much work does that take, and how do you do that?
It can definitely be a fair amount of work. I mean, honestly, it's a conversation that you have with the person and explaining the whys as much as possible. Because as you said, we all know that we work in a corporate world. You have to answer to things beyond just the intimate little bubble that Scrum wants us to operate within. And we know that's going to be the case. And so I would say the onboarding process is kind of one, explaining all of that, but it's also the self-reflection that a Scrum Master should be doing of, okay, but how can I also help my team deal with all of this, because it's not fair for me to just dump it all on my team and say, well, sorry, Chad, but I know you want to do 3-week sprints, but I have to report out on 2-week sprints. So tough rocks. That's how it's going to be. I need to work with my team to find those solutions. And I think that's what I want to cover during the onboarding is I need to build that trust with someone so that they can come to me and explain to me why a 3-week sprint is what we need to do, for instance. And that even if I have to tell them, no, we have to stick with the 2-week. My hope is that 1, they'll understand my reasoning for it, and that 2, they will still feel comfortable bringing things to me in the future, even if I won't necessarily be able to do anything about it. So I think to me, that's what onboarding is really all about, is it's building that trust, prepping them for the fact that we do have to report out. We have to exist within a broader ecosystem than just what this intimate little team is. And then just trying to explain the why and the why we do the things the way that you need to have those answers too. You can't just regurgitate what Agile tells us and what Scrum tells us. You need to have a personal knowledge about why we do. You need to believe in it.
That was excellent. I have a follow-up. As we work on projects, we don't always have Brian Ganas as our Scrum Master.
It's true.
As developers, how do we help the Scrum Master? When we see that, our stamps are taking too long. We're recognizing all these things that are happening. The patterns have turned into anti-patterns. Mm-hmm. How can a dev help right the ship, maybe nudge things in the right direction?
Yeah.
And is that something that is even possible?
Yes, is, I hope, always the answer. It should always be possible. And ideally, that's what the retro is supposed to be for. But I wouldn't want to also portray that that's the only time you chat about that stuff. A Scrum Master is someone who should be open to criticism, open to feedback. They should be open to your ideas. And you can bring that up whenever. A retro is a great place to do it when you've got the whole team together, but talk to your Scrum Master. I mean, that is the single answer. I recognize that there are individuals out there who don't receive feedback as well as they should. And I would argue you shouldn't be a Scrum Master if that's your personality. We have to adapt because your whole role is to protect the team, to remove roadblocks. I mean, how often have we heard that? The Scrum Master's job is to remove roadblocks for the team. And if they are bringing roadblocks to you and you are doing nothing about it because, well, that's just the way it is, or that's not how I do things, I think you're in the wrong profession. To be honest, a Scrum Master is, in my opinion, the person who probably needs to be the most flexible on a team. They need to be the most willing to hear all the different ideas and assign weight to all of those ideas. Even if their initial reaction is that they think it's a terrible idea, you still have to treat it like it's something worth researching. And you may discover it was, in fact, a great idea after all. So that's, again, the answer is ultimately just you bring it to your Scrum Master, and then it is our job to take that information and transform it into something that can help you out. And if you don't have someone who's willing to do that as your Scrum Master, it's very frustrating. And I have been there myself. We've all been there, I'm sure. Hopefully it will get better. I think that's all I can ultimately say. But that's what we should be working on as Scrum Masters, in my opinion. We're here to help the team.
I think. I heard one of the guys I used to work with a long time ago, he had laws. The third law of, Soderbergh's law number 3 was if somebody does it for a living, it's way harder than you think.
Yes.
If you look at a graphic designer, oh, you made a doodle. Oh, I could do that. No, I can't.
Yeah.
That's art.
That's what I thought about BAs before I actually became one, and I was like, "Oh,
right.
Now I understand why this profession exists."
So I think you're new as a Scrum Master. There's going to be imposter syndrome. It is harder than maybe people think it is, and the natural state is it goes toward the anti-patterns. Mm-hmm. So it is a struggle. It takes work to kind of bring it back and keep it on track. What inspirational words would you give to a budding Scrum Master?
I would want to make it sound better than this, but I think the overall idea is we all want to go into a new role thinking that we're going to be that person who comes in and challenges the status quo and fights the good fight and tells everybody you're doing this wrong and we need to fix this this and fix that. Every one of us has realized how hard it is to actually be that person when you get in. You come in with all these amazing ideas and you want to make all these changes, but it's really hard. A Scrum Master doesn't get to just sit back and say, it's too hard. Your job is to be that person and to challenge the things that need to be challenged. And you've got to get comfortable with it. And however you can figure out how to do it, you just have to do it. So figure it out. And ultimately, it may sting, it may hurt because you're going to be getting told no a lot, but you have to be persistent, and eventually things are going to come around. If you keep advocating and you truly believe in what you're trying to advocate for, you are going to make that change you're asking for, and you are going to help people. So remember that that is your goal, to help them and keep fighting for them, because eventually you're going to do it. And then all those no's start turning into the somewhat infrequent yeses. And then they turn into more frequent yeses, because now you are a trusted person. And they know that when this Scrum Master comes and challenges me on this thing, I should listen to them, because their team is producing, their team likes them and is actually putting out good work. So I'm going to start to listen a little bit more when they challenge me on something. I kind of switched personas there throughout my little inspirational speech, but I think that's the main thing, is like, you, as a Scrum Master, you've got to come in ready and willing to be that person who's going to fight, because that's what it's going to take.
And then I think, as a former low code developer, understanding that they're struggling, they have a fight as well. It's not just my stuff. And why aren't they doing this? Why aren't they doing that? It's like understanding that, it's not an easy job. And it's an important role.
Yeah. I agree. It's as important, arguably, but it's as important as everyone else on the team. And it also goes back to the idea of we're all on a team together. It's not the PO versus the Scrum Master versus the dev team. We're all in this together, and we should all be working toward a common goal. I think the Scrum Master is kind of the person who acts as the hub that tries to bring all those ideas together, but we are on the team together, and your success is my success and vice versa. Operate like that. And there are things the Scrum Master is going to need from the team members. We right. need things like sprint commitments, so that when I'm telling a stakeholder, we said we're going to get this item done this sprint, we need to get it done. And so, yes, it's, kind of going back to an earlier point that Chad had said, like, sometimes we get way too hung up on the idea that stories are carrying over from one sprint to another. But at the same time, the sprint is supposed to be a commitment. And so those are things where we need to ask the team, we as Scrum Masters need to ask the team for their help as well. In that when we make a sprint commitment, for instance, we really do want to commit to it. And it can't just be this lax thing. So I think, trying to remember that we're all a part of the same team, and your input is what drives the Scrum Master, but they're going to have stuff that they need you to do to make their job work as well.
I think that's a great parting thought.
I think it's a great parting thought, and I think it's a great setup for episode 3 on the same topic.
On the Scrumcast. I'm inspired. All right. Thank you, Brian. It's been great having you on. I appreciate it. And thank you, Chad and Peter. A lot of great discussion. And I think with that, we'll just say goodbye, everybody.
All right,
everybody.
See you guys.
Solution Design Group is a digital product consultancy in Minneapolis. Check us out on the web at solutiondesign.com, or look for us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram at Solution Design Group.